Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough for me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have, crumbs, I could say a colleague, an old friend, a big thinker, a tall man even. And he's called Joel Bailey, who is the product and services director now, that is, at Arwen.ai. Joel, a pleasure to talk to you. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks, Adrian. Thanks for having me along.
You're very welcome. Now, so I know you, and we've done some work together. I remember being in Stirling kind of numbers of years ago, which was kind of bizarre. A nice trip, but it was kind of bizarre nevertheless. But for the benefit of our listeners and our readers and people that are not familiar with you and where you've come from, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also about the work you're currently doing?
Sure, yeah. So, we've crossed paths many times, haven't we? I have been working in customer experience and service design for a best part of 25 years. I've been lucky enough to do it in all number of different roles and fashions. So as an entrepreneur, as a consultant, as a business leader within organizations. And so that's kind of taken me far and wide. I've worked across sectors, public and private sector. And really the root of what I do is helping people to be more user-centered, customer-centered or human-centered. Over 25 years, those words have moved around quite a lot. But essentially, as organizations scale, they kind of lose touch with who their customers are. And to reconnect that and put it into a more experimental mindset so you can get more creative is one of the keys to success in an organization. So I've done that for different blue chip organizations, different public sector bodies. Most recently, I was young at EY Seren, where I worked across financial services and various other different areas. So that's kind of where I've come from. I jumped out of that world into a parallel world to be in the founding group of a startup called Arwen. And Arwen is a piece of technology that removes hate and toxic content from social media. And a group of us witnessed what was going on over the last few years, remembered how Twitter and Facebook and Instagram used to be in the early days. Lots of fun. Met people.
Those days.
They were wonderful. And we just sort of getting gradually more toxic. And everybody saying, what can be done? What can be done? And we knew that we had an answer. So myself, a few others created this product. And our mission is very simple. We want to make social media social again. And we have the technology to do it and the wherewithal to do it. And it's proving a really exciting journey. I'm really excited to talk about it.
I mean, and this people might be listening into this and thinking about, what the frick has that got to do with kind of like customer service and customer experience and stuff? Well, it actually does, because there's a bigger context to this, but that we'll get into and how it's kind of applicable, as it were.
Definitely. Yeah.
But then, so you talked about Arwen is dedicated to making social media social again by removing hate speech and toxicity from social media channels. But if we step back a little bit, let's kind of size the problem. Let's put our arms around it, as it were. And like, how much hate speech and toxicity are we talking about? Because just so we can get an idea of the scale of the problem.
Yeah. Because it's interesting that the high profile stuff is generally all about racism. But actually, that's not the most significant part of it at all. To start with, 4 in 10 people each year in the UK witness online abuse of some form. And the most prevailing form of online hate and toxicity is physical shaming. And then you go into the areas of ethnicity and sexual orientation, political views, obviously very polarizing. And we've all witnessed it, right? And we probably all have got a bit used to it, but it really is a pollutant in our social channels.
Well, in our life, it's not just. There's an osmotic sort of thing. You see it here, and it's like it surrounds us. It's not just on social channels.
That's a really interesting point, because there's a lot of research about the erosion of social trust that comes from social media. That we start to not trust other people's integrity. We think people are out to get other people rather than out to just kind of connect with other people. So you have this odd effect. And to connect that into the subject of customer experience, more and more customer experiences are happening on social channels. 80% of businesses, about 82% of businesses say that social channels are a key part of what they do. The social commerce market globally is about $440 billion a year. That's people buying things through social channels. And then you've got social customer service that we'll talk about later. But you've got a large amount of hate going on across these channels and not much being done about them. You shared something with me, actually, which was really fascinating, which was that 60% of contact center agents have experienced online hate.
Yeah.
And that is unacceptable. And what it is you get this weird behavior change. The people in their normal day-to-day life, when they have the anonymity of online social media, they change their behavior. They will do things online that they would never do offline. And the research really demonstrates that.
It's psychotic. I mean,
it is.
It's, I mean, years, in the future, I'm sure, or maybe there's current research going on right now, but I'm pretty sure people will kind of look at that and just go, that's a kind of psychotic behavior there.
Yeah.
Kind of like, ta-da, the evidence is all there.
Yeah, so I speak to some of our customers who are high-profile individuals, and they will tell me that they couldn't stop themselves as victims looking at the people who are abusing them and going out following the rabbit hole just to see who they were. And these were like dads and mums on Facebook. And it was just very perplexing for them. So you get this very odd behavior. And unfortunately, the pandemic has not helped. We've seen a 20% increase in hate on social media since the pandemic began. So there's all sorts of things going on. I don't claim to understand all the detail about why it's happening. All I know is it is happening and it needs to be dealt with.
And so if all of this sort of stuff, I mean, it's still there right now. Some people are trying to do something, you're trying to do something about it, but it's still there. It exists, right? I mean, I guess my question would be, if I think about it from my customer advocacy hat on it.
Yeah.
I mean, what impact is that having on brands and their customers? And also by doing nothing about it or removing it or actively managing it, I mean, is it costing them? And if so, how much?
Yeah, I mean, we always start, and the assumed place to go when you talk about hate is to talk about mental health impact. And there is a considerable mental health impact. But actually, that's not the real cost to hate. Where there's not much research on this, and we've had some done and we've looked for others. We've pulled together a pretty terrifying story, actually. So I mentioned earlier that social commerce has this rising value, $440 billion globally. And that there's research that when people feel like they're in an unsafe environment in social media, 37% of those people will disengage from the content that they're seeing. So any sponsored content, any advertising, any push content, if there's toxicity or an unsafe environment around that, people will disengage. Now that's a third of people on these channels. And when you consider how much money is thrown at social media to try and engage, it's insane to me that there's a potential $160 billion a year being left on the table because of hate and toxicity. And it's insane that no one's doing anything about it, right? Everybody's waiting, and we'll talk a bit more about this, I'm sure. They're all waiting.
Well, let's point the finger at the social media companies, because there's all this kind of talk. Why are they not doing more about it?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, without getting political and all that, some pointing fingers at specific brands and stuff.
Oh, no, I don't think you need to political on this one. There are some just hard facts around it. But we obviously asked ourselves this question quite seriously. We're now partners with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. We work with them. They, I think, enjoy having third parties to do some of this because for many ways, they aren't publishers, so they aren't responsible for pre-publication moderation. They don't want to be responsible for it. And in a way, they can't be, right? Because we enjoy.
Yeah, no, but that's kind of a really interesting sort of like moral, kind of like legalistic sort of argument. And it's you get stuck in the gray, it's like rattling around between these rails sort of thing, and then nothing gets done.
Well, and it's a business model argument as well, right? The value, the cost of moderating content prior to it going to being published, like a newspaper has to do. Right? Sure. It's a high cost to moderate content, very low cost to do it post-publication. You're basically saying to the user, you moderate your own content. And that's how they work. Because the business model of these social networks is obviously they get paid advertising for eyeballs on things. Now, if you had to do the pre-publication moderation costs, it wouldn't balance out, right? You wouldn't be making a profit. It wouldn't work. So we'd end up having to pay for these things.
I mean, I also think there's a kind of part of it as well is that, that kind of old saying was that, there's no such thing as bad publicity. And it sort of feeds into that sort of thing. So when something kind of comes up and it's like on fire because it's all polemic and stuff, and then they get people pile in and doing more hate or more eyeballs on it because they're horrified. And it's just like, and it feeds the impressions and everything else, and feeds the business model and stuff.
Yeah, they're all the networks are pretty tight-lipped about how their algorithms work. It's very hard to penetrate that, but a lot of the information that's come out through whistleblowers or has come out through analysis is that, negative engagement is very powerful, right? Potentially, most likely more powerful than positive engagement, but it's a short run game.
Yeah, it's you look at the history of newspapers is like kind of, what is it the old saying in the newspaper world is like what bleeds leads.
Yeah, and that is because we all like to rubberneck. Right, you see a crash on the motorway and everything slows down. Everyone believes that they don't do it, but how is it the traffic always slows down? So we all buy the newspapers. So it's like we can't just blame the networks. We all have to play a role. I also have a view, which is like, why do we expect social media to be any different from the real world? It's not like we go into the real world and there's no hate and toxicity.
That is fair comment.
How do we expect it to be dealt with online? All we're doing, the analogy I use is social media has been a bit of a free-for-all. Let's say you're having a party in your house and you've got all your friends there, all the friends that you've built up over many years and you love them all dearly. And then 3 or 4 people just walking off the street and just start abusing everybody and shouting at them. That's kind of how social media is at the moment. They can just walk into a community and say what they want. You can then phone someone, the building manager, and ask them to be removed. You can phone the police, but that might take a while. They might have gone by then. It's very hard to get them removed at the moment. All we do, Arwen, is say, well, we're going to give you a key to lock your front door. They can still shout the things they want to shout in the street to their own community. They're fine, but they can't come into your house and do that. And people kind of get that. That's the logic. The world has toxicity and hate in it. We are not going to solve that. But you have an ownership of your community, particularly if you're an influencer or you're a business. You've built up this following for your brand, for what you represent. You have a right to own and protect and manage that community.
So you almost are putting a walled garden around it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as I said earlier, that works very well in terms of what the networks are trying to do. So we as a third-party partner to them are able to give people tools, allow them to control their boundaries of that walled garden, if you like, and make sure that if you're a brand and you're online and you've invested a lot in that brand and you want to protect that brand, you can do that. And with our technology, you can remove the message you don't want your communities to see in less than a second. Right. And you can see who your top offenders are every week, and you can deal with them in a much more objective way. It just takes all the noise out of the situation, makes it much clearer.
Yeah, because I think the other thing that we need to kind of like play into this, because, you're absolutely right. We talked about this, and it's like it's not just limited to social media channels. I mean, there's the level of abuse has gone up. The level of kind of hate and toxicity has gone up over the pandemic. I don't know if people are just going mad, or I guess there's that old idea is like you don't understand your true self until you're put under pressure.
and your true self will out, as it were. And it's usually kind of on the extremes of things.
Yeah, and people, a lot of research, most of it academic at this stage, but really good, is that people are always very ashamed and apologetic. I say always. They're not. You've got professional trolls who love what they do, right? And they get a lot of energy. It's quite a dark energy. But there is a whole chunk of people who are just doing this because they make mistakes. They flare up, they're having a bad day, and they shoot and they fire off something. When they are tracked down and they're talked to, they're apologetic. They're like, that's not the real me. I don't normally do that. So you're in this difficult situation, and this is important for customer experience, because what we find increasingly is that businesses are dealing with customers on social channels who are acting out of the norm, and they can't sanction those customers. They want them to remain customers, but they can't accommodate their behavior in that weird online way. So we have to find this new middle ground. And what a lot of our clients are doing is a kind of 3 strikes rule, which is like, okay, so we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt a couple of times, and then we're probably going to block you from the community because we don't want to, right? What we're helping our clients do in creating community social media policies is to create positive communities where everybody is included. So we don't want people being blocked out of it. But at the end of the day, if you've got someone who is doing more than just making mistakes and having a bad day and flaring up, which does happen, certainly on social media with the anonymity, if it's more than that and it's persistent offensive content and toxic content, then they should be removed from the community, and you will have a record through Arwin of all the things they said, should you need to back that up.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's the direction that it's happening, particularly if you've got 60% of your frontline staff who are dealing with those contacts, having to deal with it. Like, if you think about the equivalent in the offline world, like let's say you had a branch or you had a store and people were regularly just walking off the street and shouting abuse at your stuff, it would be an outcry. It's visible. Everyone can see it, and it's publicly shaming for that brand. Because it's invisible and discreet online, the only person who experiences it is that frontline staff member. And I think it's potential kind of future problem for organizations. They need to get ahead of this. There's well-being issues here, there's brand reputation issues here, and that lost sort of social CX and social commerce value.
I think there's also kind of more than that as well, a different dimension to that, because there's a performance issue. So I saw an interesting piece of research a while ago that actually came out from Pega like last year. And it was frightening. It said like there was like 10% of the people, the customers that they had surveyed had said they had had such a bad experience with a particular brand that it either had basically spoiled their whole day or made them cry. Wow. I'm like going 10%. I mean, 10% is a lot. If you can scale that all up. Now, if that's happening for customers, if you flip it over and add in this toxicity kind of like and hate going kind of like towards the frontline agents and stuff, what we forget, because it gets rolled up in this whole well-being sort of thing, we don't necessarily kind of think about the impact it's having other than the well-being, but it also has an impact on performance.
Totally.
I mean, imagine if somebody was coming roaring at you, kind of saying all sorts of spiteful and hateful things, and then you're expected to take that, try and deal with that, try and manage that, and then as soon as that's finished, you flip into go like, "Hi, how you doing?" You're like, "That's just not normal." Yeah,
you see this a lot, and there's a couple of studies done around social pain and the idea that when you feel threatening behavior, even if it's online, you can still feel it as a physical form of pain. Yeah. There was a program with David Baddiel, who I think he did it a little while ago, I think it was on the BBC, where he went through an MRI scanner just to see what his brain was doing under threat from social content. And he was getting physical feelings of distress. Now, that's obviously going to affect performance. And for us, performance on a scale, right? So you've got your front-end call center agent. And we know that there's big burnout around moderators, and people have to deal with toxic content. It's a real problem. And beyond just well-being, we're talking about people being sued by moderators for lack of duty of care. And then we have customers who have football clubs, Premiership football clubs. And when we talk to them, performance is, well, you've got a star striker, and if they see something toxic before they go out on that pitch, and you've bought them for 50 million, you're paying them X amounts, thousands a week, and they miss that goal, like, what's that worth to you? So performance at every level of each end of the spectrum is just enormous there. So whether you're talking about talent, celebrities right at the high end who have to perform right in the moment in such an important way. That's a large part of our customer base. But we also have customers who are down the other end who are like, well, I've got large numbers of people who are having to plow through this content daily, and I just want to protect them better. So either end, performance, you're absolutely right. People don't just feel a bit sad after dealing with hate. They feel physically unwell.
Yeah, no, completely. And it's like, but they're expected to kind of keep going on and keep going on. And it's like, brilliant. I wanted to also just quickly before we go on, I want to come back to kind of something you said about the studies that when people get tracked down and then they're kind of found, they've kind of like, oh, they're very apologetic and stuff. And I just want to say this kind of like out loud and in public. And I'm a bit like, I think that stinks. And you know why I think it stinks? Not that kind of that they're not what you've said, but like kind of what they've said. Because here's the thing that I kind of like, my sense is, it feels like it's almost worse to be called something or to be accused of something rather than to be something. Like you can be a bigot, you can be kind of like a misogynist, you can be a racist, you can be all these different sort of like, things. But actually to be accused of those is almost like worse than actually being one of those sort of things.
Yeah.
And that's that kind of whole social kind of thing.
It's really interesting.
And I'm a bit like going, crumbs. That's where you got to. And it's almost like it holds everything back. If you can't kind of like get to the kind of point where somebody goes, that was offensive.
Yeah.
And then I go, oh, they can't just lean in and say sorry.
Well, I think you're right. And it's particularly, this is why social CX and social commerce are so different, and people haven't quite switched on to that, which is the whole logic of the customer is always right is quite a lot more challenging within this environment, because the customer is just kind of Jekyll and Hyde potentially. Yeah. One day they're like, hey, I'm a happy kind of easygoing person, but then they'll flare up in that anonymity and do something which is just becoming normalized on social channels. And that's part of what we're trying to do, is denormalize that behavior. And the more customers we get, the more people who put these social media policies in place, we want to root it out, right? This should not be normal behavior. It should not be right, because I think you're right. It's unacceptable. But if you're a brand, you don't want to alienate a huge chunk of your customer base, because the customer has always been right, and now increasingly they're wrong. So how do we deal with that? And for us, it's about having the right policy in place and having the right tool, like Arwen, to police that policy and enforce it.
But here's also the other thing, an interesting kind of thing, because you're starting to, and it should never be, but some of these issues and how you respond to some of these issues becomes political. Right. And there's research that shows, and people go, oh, brands shouldn't be political, particularly, but, it's almost a bit like you talk about trust, and you talk about some research coming out. I mean, look at the ADM Trust Barometer that came out kind of early part of this year. It's showing that trust in government and media is plummeting, and actually business is becoming the most trusted institution around the world. And customers and people just generally are looking increasingly for businesses and brands to exercise agency on their behalf. So that's the kind of one thing. The other kind of another piece of research we talks about when you people then start to get really antsy when you start to get into more political domains. People are like, oh, we shouldn't be political. But here's the thing: there was a piece of research that was done which goes, you know what? Yes, it's risky, but here's the payoff. If you choose to take a stand on something, yes, you will lose customers. But guess what? The people that you can like stand with will tend to kind of be more loyal and spend more with you, and then you end up kind of attracting kind of more. So it becomes this double-edged sort of sword. So it's like this risky sort of thing, but there's a payoff for taking a stand. And more often than not, people don't, because like you talk about that experimental sort of like thing. They're not willing to experiment with stuff that they're not necessarily comfortable with because it's too new.
Yeah. I read a really good report that was put out, I think it was by Twitter the other day, about sports, social media and sports, and the shifting demographic that I can't remember the numbers I found. I'll share it with you afterwards. But we're talking well over 50% of younger demographics will be more open or more loyal to a brand that is actively supporting social justice. And now that's not just a brand saying we support social justice. You actually have to do it day in, day out. You have to be out there on all your channels, right? Visibly being socially just. Now that is challenging. But that is something that like we are trying to help clients with. So if you have a diversity and inclusion agenda, you have an agenda around social justice. That means you have to tackle homophobia, transphobia, racism, and you have to make sure that stuff is nipped in the bud around your brand. So that is a political act, and you need to be clear on what your values are. Otherwise, you're going to end up totally confused, and everyone will be totally confused around you. But it is a bold gamble for many. If you look at the demographics of your current customer base and who's coming, some are making the move earlier. They're saying, well, we've got a younger demographic coming through. They're the bigger buyers. They're the bigger, longer-term customers with lifetime value. We need to make the move. So we need to start actively having solutions like this in place so that we can demonstrate our commitment, not just talk about our commitment.
Perfect. Now, so let's kind of like crumbs. I feel like I could talk about this for hours, but we could probably end up chasing our tails. But to give people an idea of what we're kind of dealing with here, and to bring it, to life, you've alluded to a couple of different sort of like kind of people. But do you have a couple of examples of brands that you're working with that are leveraging your tech, and the ones that you can share with us, the problems that they were facing, and kind of like what they've achieved, and kind of what benefits they've been able to kind of like obtain by using your tech?
So I mean, I have to be a little careful about who I do share, but there are some that I can share. So we've been really lucky to work with Rosie Jones, the comedian who suffers from cerebral palsy.
And I also say, kind of on the record, she is fucking hilarious. She's brilliant.
She's also a wonderful human being.
I know as well.
I love her.
And proudly Northern and all that sort of kind of like good stuff. And she is a ray of sunshine. She's a joy.
She totally is. And she loves social media, but not the dark, dirty bit in the corner. Unfortunately, she does get quite a bit of that. She's vocal and outspoken and excited about everything in her life. Not everybody shares that view. So the benefits she gets is that we run silently in the background of her social media, and we spot all of those things, and within under a second they get removed. And there's two values to that. One is just reassurance for her, that not just for her that she's not seeing it, but that her community aren't seeing it, because her community get really inflamed by it. And the second value is it stops the pile-ons from happening. They're called dog piling in America, pile-ons over here. But it's where someone gives permission by saying something ugly for other people to then pile in, and it normalizes that statement. So suddenly you have 20 people saying it, and then it just inflames, and before you know it, the whole building is burning. So that stopped as well. So for her, it's the simple elements like that. When I think about some of our business clients, and I have to be discreet here, but we have Premiership Football Club clients who get different forms of value. So we talked about the employee and talent performance and protecting those individuals. And we know, we've all heard the stories about racism in particular in football. So making sure that is removed very quickly is important to our clients. It's also some basic numbers around productivity. So they all have social media teams and they all moderate content, and the amount of time for moderating toxicity was just going up and up and up. And we're talking about spam, we're talking about hate, we're talking profanity. It's just going up. And so we're spending more and more time dealing with that. And with our win, that time has gone down by about 75%. Again, because it just works in the background. And we give them a suspect queue where the AI is I'm a bit unsure about this one, you should take a look at it. So they only have to look at that and deal with that piece. So that's really good for them. And then the third bit is much more commercial. It goes back to this principle of, well, if a third of people are switching off because of an unsafe environment, I can now promote my channels to sponsors and advertisers as much healthier, much cleaner, much safer, and therefore with 100% potential engagement, not just down at the 67%, which is the research indicates is what you get with hate and toxicity. So clean channels are better for everybody. The community likes it. It means that the positive stories can cut up and through, and the negative stories are pushed aside. Nice. So they're all really practical stories. And then we get into the really interesting stuff. When you build a product like that just gets rid of the hate, now people are starting to ask other questions. So the data that comes out the back is super interesting. Who's saying what? Who are my repeat offenders? How do I report them to the network? What illegal content has come through? How do I then take those people to the authorities? Because again, it's about denormalizing this and making use of the law that already exists. I saw Angela Rayner, she's not a client of ours, the politician, the MP, she had two people taken to court for the content that she got via email and via social media, I think. And she gets a lot of that as well, very misogynistic and hateful. And there are laws against this stuff, right? I know there's the online safety bill coming, but there are already laws. And what we want to do is empower people to make use of what's already there. And our clients are just enjoying having that tool in place.
Awesome. So, I mean, just a quick question on the specifics and stuff around, because you talk about the suspect queue, and it made me think about the training the AI and defining kind of what is hate and what is toxicity. Is that specific to every kind of client, or is that kind of done off a sort of a large set of your own sort of like training kind of data that you've done the research on?
We made a choice early on to hire data models from the open market.
Okay.
So you can't really have one data model that will handle all types of hate. So we source data models from the open market. We're a platform-based model. So we classify for 23 different types of hate. I won't list them all for you, but they're all the ones that we know and love and hate. And there's 23 of those. And what we do, if you remember the world of graphic equalizers back in the 80s, I'm old enough to remember such things. We essentially give people a graphic equalizer that they can slide up and down depending on what they need. So Rosie Jones is a great example. Loves a bit of profanity, does Rosie? Loves a bit of profanity. And people do, right? And that's fine. So she doesn't mind profanity. So she changes her graphic equalizer for that. Whereas we have other clients who are family brands, don't want any profanity. Or certain types of profanity. And I'm an expert in the ONS list of profane words now, and I know which ones are acceptable and which ones aren't. So we can deal with all of that. So people are allowed to control it. And that's really important, because at the end of the day, we are all about free speech. We don't want to be centrally dictating what is good or bad. It's for each of our individual customers to work that out based on their own values. So that graphic equalizer with multiple models around it enables real flexibility.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. Cool.
Yeah. When we have clients who come in and they say to us, well, I mean, again, I'll talk about Rosie. So Rosie came in, she suffers from ableist abuse, homophobic abuse. So she's a really challenging test case for us. So we're now looking at ableist data models that we can get from academics in other parts of the world. And that's what they do really well. Like we have a sexual aggression one, which comes from a dating website. So they create a great data model for that. We don't want to recreate that, so we just take theirs. We've got an academic data model on white supremacism and bigotry. We hire theirs. We pay them a fee for all of that. And our skill is blending it together and applying it in that millisecond to make sure that we classify that mention for all types of hate and either remove it or let it pass.
That's super interesting and nice. I tip my hat to you on that. That's very cool.
Oh, thank you. It's been a lot of hard work, and I tip my hat to our engineering team who work very, very hard. Data science, and I couldn't do it. I come from a business design and CX background. So for me, it's all about how do we plug this thing together and give a great service and experience to our customers. But yeah, hat tip to our engineering team.
Oh yeah, to you all. And absolutely. Big shout out to the guys in the background that they actually build all this sort of stuff and do the kind of the hard cranking.
God.
So hopefully that's given people a flavor, kind of like what you're trying to do and the kind of challenge that you're taking on, which I think is laudable, which is and much needed. I mean, but before we kind of skip and I want to ask you, get your take on a few sort of general questions. Is there anything else that you want to highlight or that we've missed out?
No, I think we covered it. I guess there's probably one thing. We talked a lot about hate and toxicity, like human-driven. The bit I'm probably most excited about that we're moving into is spam bots.
Right.
Because what is classic, you'll know this. You go to a customer and you solve a problem for them, and they like that you solved it. Then they immediately go, "Oh, there's another problem over here." And actually, that other problem is connected with our mission, which is making social media social again. So, yeah, hate is a pollutant. But bots are a pollutant. So some of our clients have multi-million followers on their channels. And what that means is if you're a bot engineer, a bot manufacturer somewhere, what you want to do is as soon as X football club puts a post out there on Instagram, I'm going to know that, and I'm going to instantly pile in and promote pornography, or I'm going to promote some sort of scam, some sort of phishing deal. And that'll be the first 20 posts that people see. And you've got a wide demographic of people who are then looking at that content. 10 million people potentially will see that. That, for me, is toxic and it's pollutant, and we need to get rid of it. So that's the most exciting part of what we're doing, is that extension of our data models so that we can classify bots. And it's an area that's not been done very well so far. We're doing it based on content rather than IP address. So it means that we can have a much richer view. But it does mean that we're all having to look at a lot of bot content at the moment. And it's ugly. It gums up the gears of social media for businesses, for users. I'm really excited to be helping to get rid of that as well.
Awesome. I mean, that's pretty good. I mean, it's just wasteful. It's kind of like it wastes our time and our attention and our energy and everything else.
Yeah, but it's like the postal stuff. That's sort of died down because they've all gone online. I used to get this junk mail through the post, and I used to get angry about all the wasted paper and effort. But all these guys, it's even worse online because all I need is 0.0001% click-through rate, and they've made some money for very little cost. So it's the volume of it is staggering. So to stop that would be fantastic.
Well, it's wasteful and this is becoming increasingly apparent when in a digital realm, is that people think that in a digital realm that there's no cost to posting something. There's an energy cost to posting something. There's a storage cost to post something, and that all requires energy to do, and equipment and so on and so forth. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but there's a guy called Jerry McGovern in Ireland.
Ah, yes, I know him well. Well, I know him well-ish.
Yeah, he's sort of like he's now on his worldwide waste thing. I've had Jerry on the kind of podcast before, and he is crusading. Actually, not crusading. I don't like that word. He is advocating and championing the kind of the idea of that we cannot not pay attention to the digital world and not assume that it has a real impact because it's rooted in the real world. Oh
yeah, his weekly newsletter is, I think I've subscribed for the last 15 years. It's one of the few that I read every week. He's excellent.
Excellent. So, Joel, if we can step back and just take a bit of a macro view of the things, because I know you're as you say, you've been in this sort of service and CX and design sort of space for the last sort of 25 years. And I want to ask you a few questions about, to get you to peer into your kind of like crystal ball, as it were. I mean, so what does the future of service and experience look like from your side of the table, as it were? And what do you also think some of the key challenges or hurdles we're going to have to navigate kind of in order to achieve those outcomes that we want to deliver?
Yeah. One of the reasons why moved from consulting over to startup, and obviously I fell in love with the mission of Arwen, right, and the purpose of it. But actually, it was also an element of practicing what I preach. I've helped lots of other clients build products and services, take them to market, and thrive with them. But doing it myself was important. And one of the sort of byproduct benefits of that I wasn't expecting was just to immerse myself in how sophisticated service technology has become. And because I was used to working with very large organizations where a little bit decrepit in terms of the technologies they have, often have very big software platforms, but quite ill-connected. They often have multiple departments. You'll know this, it's all very siloed and quite difficult. The joy of working in a startup and seeing how nimble you can be using some of these technologies is just amazing. And so I think there is a gap building, and we talked about it before. I'm sure you have had other people talk about it, between the laggards and the leaders. The leaders can move at exponential speed now. You can create an experiment, not just with marketing, which is often where people see a lot of the technology of putting the right ad in front of the right person at the right moment. That's migrating into the service end of the spectrum. So now there is no real there's no you won't be forgiven for not using these technologies in a few years' time, right? You've got to use them, because service has always been a bit of the orphan child. We've won the customer, they're now a customer, I banked them, I'll move on. But we know that people are able to fire services instantly these days. I mean, even a bank, 7 days these days? But you can fire a service overnight. So retention has been the game in town for the last 10 years. That's what CX is all about.
Yeah.
The tools to retain customers now are just so much more sophisticated. And as long as you're using them with integrity, and there's obviously a lack of that sometimes in the market, but that's the bit that gets me most excited, is the richness of insight about a customer and the ability to know what that customer might want before they know they might want it, and the ability to nudge them towards the right thing that's mutually beneficial. That's where the integrity bit comes in, is phenomenal. And I don't think my eyes were fully open to that working with larger organizations. So it's been fantastic to kind of see that and witness, I guess, the gap that's opened up there. That's a big challenge, I think, for many organizations who want to be nimble and fast, who want to use that technology in that way, but struggle to do it. But I think the winners will use it. They'll find a way.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm here on that, and kind of what he said, and all those other kind of plus ones, and et cetera, et cetera. But we've talked about all these different kind of things. I mean, like is normal on the podcast, these things are always a bit of a rummage, and we go slightly off piste, and then we come back again and stuff. But I also know that kind of like from speaking to people is that they get people can often get overwhelmed by the scale of things, right? And it's like we've talked all these different things. You're like, okay, that's really interesting. I'm now bleeding from the ears, and I don't know what to do. So if I have to ask you to boil it down a little bit and sort of be slightly instructive, to give us your best advice of what, if somebody's listening into this that wants to improve their customer and their employee experience, from your perspective, what would be your best advice, or so your instructions, like do this or do this? What would it be?
So I think the one that's top of my list right now, given the growth of this sector, is to really pay attention to social CX and the threat that hate and toxicity has in that area, and not to wait for someone else to solve it, right? We could have talked for a long time about why you can't expect the networks to solve it and why we shouldn't expect the regulators to solve it. It's not going to get solved overnight. You shouldn't wait, because as you wait, it's just accumulating. And it has this multivarious kind of impact on the business, a lot of which is invisible.
Yeah.
Hopefully I've described some of that. So I think what I'd be saying to people is, if you take away one thing, is to take social CX seriously, and to see that many, especially of your younger demographic customers, are there already, and they are experiencing it in an unsafe and toxic way. And you, unfortunately, I know you don't want to be as organizations, but you're responsible for the safety of your customers in that, and your followers and your communities in those environments, not to mention your employees as well. So take that seriously, and find ways to solve it, because it is solvable. We've proved it, and I think we all deserve and want a better social space.
Nice. Absolutely. Thank you for that. So one final thing, or a couple of final things before we go, and I've always been asking at the end of these kind of podcasts ever since I sort of published Punk CX back in 2019. I'm doing this, I call it longitudinal social research. Just sounds fancy, but it's just literally kind of like episodic word association, really. So I asked people two questions, and they sort of morphed, because the second one is to do with Punk XL, which you're familiar with, familiar with Punk CX. In fact, I should say a big shout out to Joel, who in April of 2020 sent me this email that said, amazing to see how much Punk CX is going on right now. Excuse me, frog in my throat. Where people are bootstrapping their way through kind of changes that would normally take months, if not years, but they're doing it in weeks. So, and that's, it was a really, so first of all, publicly, thank you for that, because it was just, when it came, I was just like,
I'll send you the invoice later.
And I was, when I received it, I was like, brilliant, because it's almost a bit like, it came out in 2019, and then almost like a year later, it almost came of its time in many ways. It was like,
Very cool.
And so that was a nice kind of moment sort of for you to send it to me. But so the first question I have is, what 1 or 2 words would you use to describe a more punk approach to CX?
Well, for me, if I think about punk, it's just like the epitome of experimentalism, right? So experiments. And if I go back to the point I was just making about the sort of service technology, the technology is important, but actually what's important is the ability that you have now to experiment at such kind of ferocious speed. It's often slightly terrifying. The experiment cycle of, let's try this, see if it works, and improve upon it is hours now, if not minutes, depending on how quick you want it to be. So if you want to be more punk CX, you've got to be more experimental. Punks, that's what they did, right? They experimented. Like they didn't learn to play an instrument. They just got up on stage and had a go at it and thought, well, if people like it, they like it.
Exactly.
And I think that's the attitude you need now. It's quite bold. And it kind of really pushes against the risk averse in our world. So it's challenging in many organizations, but it's, I'd say, that's it for me. Punk CX is experimental.
Nice. I like it. Love it. The second question I have is related to the Punk XL, which is almost like the second album, as it were, in the Punk series. And deals with this idea of experience leadership, and in the broadest sense, not just the individual, but the broader sense and sort of a broader organizational sense, and that responsibility that you talked about, right? It's almost a bit like who's doing it individually, who's creating the right sort of employee experience, setting themselves up the right way to do the right sort of things, engaging and taking care of their customers, and then having a positive impact on the world, all that sort of stuff. So what company or brand do you think is an experienced leader, and why?
Well, there's one which is kind of close to my daily life at the moment, which is HubSpot. So I've got HubSpot very high on the list, mainly because, we're very lucky. We're in their startup program, so we get access to the full suite of tools, and I'm really enjoying using them. But the entire experience of being welcomed into the product set, being onboarded, being supported through what is quite a sophisticated set of tools, has just been fantastic. And the thing is, not only they've almost boiled down what they do and then created a set of tools to allow you to aspire and do what they do. So they sell and deliver and serve in such a good way. I look at them and I think, well, you've created the tool here that I want to use to be like that. So it's like this lovely virtuous circle. I find them a really interesting organization. And what's interesting is now that they are very relevant for what I do day to day, as we use their services. But if I go back a few years when they were quite young, their content has been in my life for years. Like you can't not. What am I trying to say? If you search for something to do with anything in their space, you will always find in the top 5-10 things a HubSpot link, and it's always good quality content. Yep. And they've been giving that away for free for years. And I came on your podcast, I think quite a while ago now, wasn't it, to talk about service, way back. And that for me there is this sort of selfless service that they give stuff away. And I'm sure there's a commercial rationale to it, but I never bought anything for years. But when it came to the point where we were sat here going, who are we going to use, these guys or these guys? It's like, I was obviously going to say HubSpot because I knew them, I like their content. So when it came to that point of decision, they built this goodwill up inside of me. Yeah. And that, they play that long game, and I really love them for it.
And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's something I've talked about is like when people ask me about why I do a lot of the writing and the podcasting and everything else, I do it because I get to learn a whole bunch of stuff by writing stuff down and speaking to really kind of smart and interesting kind of people. But it also allows me to without selling, to put stuff out there and to build trust at a distance.
Yeah.
And it's a long game. And they've been a pioneer. I was inspired by HubSpot a long time ago. I didn't want to do the whole sort of gated sort of content type of lead capture things. Not really interested in that bit. Yeah. But the idea about building a content hub, which is you take this inbound kind of marketing sort of thing. So you put the content out and you build that trust at a distance, and you play the long game, and it works, but it takes time and effort and consistency and on all those different sort of things. and they've been top of their game on that sort of stuff. But I think they were one of the inventors of the category of inbound kind of marketing and stuff.
Oh,
and
definitely.
They've just refined their proposition around that. And so, and they've had their ups and downs across across the years, but they keep at it. They keep true to it. I think what we're not saying about any of these companies is that a bit like the experimental sort of thing. They're willing to try new stuff.
Yep.
And they sometimes make mistakes.
Yeah.
And they sometimes get things wrong, whether that's to do with their content or how they operate or all these different sort of things. But then they course correct, and
people will forgive you if you generate goodwill. You'll be forgiven. If you don't, then you'll live by the short-term law of commerce, and you'll be dead.
Yeah.
And I look at some of the things like you look at Peloton, who had a great year, but have had a very difficult year. Some of their weird behaviours with customers and pricing, just destructive of goodwill. So you can just see it in the market, different people who are dealing with experiments and failures in very different ways.
Yeah.
It's very telling. As you say, when people are under pressure, there's when behavior comes through for a brand and for a person.
Absolutely. So Joel, that's all I have. Just like to say, lovely to talk to you again. Congratulations on the new adventure. And also on the work that you're doing. I think it's important and it matters. And for highlighting the impact of some of this sort of stuff, because the reality of the world is that sometimes it's not a very pleasant place. But we can choose how we respond to that. And brands and companies have a responsibility, as you say, to both their customers and their people to make them feel comfortable and safe and welcome and everything else. Because effectively what you're doing is you're building and you're protecting an affinity group.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's very kind of you to say, as a startup, there are days where you think, what are we doing? And there are days that you feel excited. Generally, at the end of each week, we're always excited, so that's good. But we think it's a problem worth solving, and a lot of other people seem to believe it is as well. So we're really positive, really excited. And hey, it's always great coming on your show. Thanks for having me again. Great to get the message out. So thank you, Adrian. It's been great.
Very welcome. Cheers, man.
Thanks.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.